I think this sends a message from China to two groups of people. Firstly, it's to Emmanuel Macron, Michel Barnier, people in the French government who are leading the charge on imposing these tariffs against China's EVs, but also to people like Bernard Arnault, who heads up Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, that huge, vast luxury conglomerate. They own Hennessy, a big cognac manufacturer. China is hugely important for them in terms of selling that booze, those handbags, those clothes. So it's a message not just to the politicians, it's a message to the French industrialists as well, that we have you in our sights.
Trade dispute between the EU and China could spell disaster for French cognac makers. That's the warning from the trade body representing producers of the iconic spirit in France. Joining me now to explain is Robin Brant, former China reporter for the BBC. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Patrick.
So what is this dispute between China and the EU, and why is cognac becoming such a flashpoint?
Because China likes to pick on deeply symbolic industries in deploying this tactic that it's used a lot in the past. It's a form of economic coercion. It goes for particularly symbolic sectors important in their domestic countries, in this case France and Emmanuel Macron. It doesn't want a European Union-wide trade war, but in responding to these tariffs on EVs that are manufactured in China then exported to the European Union, they're now going to be 45% more expensive under these new tariffs being imposed by the European Union. China doesn't like that. China thinks it's unfair, deeply unfair. The European Union thinks it's necessary because it thinks it can make these cars at scale. It benefits from subsidies at both provincial and national level in China. And the European Union thinks it needs to protect its domestic manufacturers as well, who are trying to establish their own EV manufacturing base and are also, crucially, trying to advance in that technology. So it's not just about the cars and protecting Renault or VW. It's also about trying to help the European Union establish its own independent supply chain when it comes to EV technology.
And obviously there's a huge automotive market in Europe. Why cognac? Obviously it's symbolic, but is it a sort of, the wealthy people in China like a European indulgence, or is it literally just the symbolism? Could this, is it a big export market for cognac, China?
Yeah, it's huge. And you heard John Boothman there talk about whiskey. Any hints of any kind of retaliatory action, say, against the UK in future, which may target Scotland's whiskey industry, would be disastrous and hugely symbolic. And you can bet your bottom dollar people in government would be listening up very quickly. I think this sends a message from China to two groups of people. Firstly, it's to Emmanuel Macron, Michel Barnier, people in the French government who are leading the charge on imposing these tariffs against China's EVs, but also to people like Bernard Arnault, who heads up Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, that huge, vast luxury conglomerate. They own Hennessy, a big cognac manufacturer. China is hugely important for them in terms of selling that booze, those handbags, those clothes. So it's a message not just to the politicians, it's a message to the French industrialists as well, that we have you in our sights.
Who in turn can exert huge political pressure on their own governments domestically. I mean, what is the resolution to this, short of the EU putting its hands up and saying, all right then, we're not going to slap tariffs on your vehicles? Is there a chance for a negotiated settlement, or will one side just have to capitulate?
Well, the European Union and Ursula von der Leyen are not going to change their mind. It's been hard to get to this point. There's been resistance from Slovakia, Hungarians, the Germans as well. Spain's not quite sure. France, as I said, was leading the way. There are now negotiations underway in terms of where the imposition of these tariffs come, and if certain manufacturers should be favoured because of their investment commitments to the European Union. So, for instance, there's a big manufacturer, you won't have heard of these company probably, called Chery. They're a big name in China. They're looking to establish a manufacturing base in Spain. That's one way to try and circumvent tariffs like this. But there is a view among the European Union that, look, the policy's been decided, it's being imposed, the negotiations are underway. Are there certain sectors, are there certain manufacturers who we look upon more favourably because of their investment commitments to the European Union?
And it's interesting you talk about, sector by sector, country by country within the EU. Just talk us through what the EU's position, what official position is on China as a whole.
Well, God, how long have you got? We have talked in era, post-pandemic, and also after allegations of widespread suppression of hundreds of thousands of Chinese Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang, about a reset. Let's talk about trade. They talked about de-risking, not decoupling, but de-risking in terms of ensuring we no longer have that dependency on supply chains when it comes to dealing with like a pandemic in the future, but also with an eye on these areas where China wants to be technologically advanced, establish a dominant position, but the European Union as well also wants to compete. What's most interesting is China's approach to this is a divide and conquer approach. It's tried to peel off certain countries, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Olaf Scholz in Germany, where his country's industrialists are hugely dependent on China as a market. Spain equivocated; it wasn't quite sure in the end. The issue for them is their pork exports. So everyone has skin in the game here. It's pork, it could be dairy, it could be cognac, it could be those big heavy ICE, that's internal combustion Mercedes and BMWs that you're making in Germany and then exporting to China. So China's approach has been to try and affect a divide and conquer. It hasn't really worked because what we have is this united front, but now there are these negotiations. And look, trying to get all 27 to agree, particularly when those who are most prominent, most influential, the Germans, have so much in the game when it comes to China, has proved to be very difficult. But so far, they're holding the line on the tariff. It's less than what the Americans and the Canadians doing, so the cars are still going to sell, but it gives that protection to Renault, to VW, to everybody else that the European Union is looking for.
Well, let's see if the cognac manufacturers of France can break that resolve. Robin Brant, former China correspondent for the BBC, thank you very much for joining us to talk us through that fascinating story about how cognac really explains the future of geopolitics and economics in Europe and in China.